Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Peter.
That was strange. For our listeners, you're listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. And we have this week, Joe Feldman. Is that right? Yeah, Joe Feldman is our guest.
Right.
Yeah.
That is right. I met Joe a couple times throughout my career, and really the thing that motivated me to recommend him, besides, I mean, he's nice, but it's his book, and you go right into it. You mentioned his book right off the bat, and he made this dialogue around shifting grading in public schools a common occurrence. And I find it to be one of the best resources for getting at that particular issue. And so I thought, God, what an opportunity. I also think, God, there must have been a thing that motivated me to recommend him too, based on a conversation you and I were having at some point. But I think he's really, really reflective in relation to that particular topic. It's great.
Yeah, it's deeply personal for him. And I'm so impressed with people who are singularly focused on issues and really work that issue. And yes, you can't be a superintendent when you do that, but you can be an educational expert and evangelist around really particular equity issue, which is equitable grading practices. Like, how do you make things fair for kids?
Yeah. That ties to that idea that what did he say? He said, it's early. He says, there's got to be better ways. He said, I was wondering, there's got to be better ways to do it. And I started looking at the research and tried to really integrate other fields. And there's got to be he says that I'm trying to arrive at a certain set of principles and ideas and practices that would make grading better, make it more accurate, more consistent, more fair, and more intrinsically motivating to kids. And I'm like, yes, I'll do that with you. Yes. If there's any major reflection I have about myself as a teacher now is, was I bad at assessment? Oh, so bad.
I want to explore that for a second, because what do you mean you were bad at assessment? I mean, you gave assessments. Was it after the assessment, looking at where kids made mistakes, their points of confusion, how to reteach, how to understand where the assessment may have been flawed? Like, you didn't do a good job of asking questions? Like, what do you mean?
Well, that was like 7 questions at once.
Yeah, I'm good at that. So you can just say yes.
Yeah, exactly. I can say yes.
Yes.
All that is true. I mean, especially because I was 22 when I started teaching. And to Joe's point also in the podcast, no, we didn't get any learning and becoming a teacher about, we could probably push it beyond grading. That's probably why I'm equating grading and assessment, like understanding whether or not someone understood the concept. Like, how do you know whether a kid knows? And how do you know what they know and what they don't know? Do you know how to analyze mistakes, to know where they're what's the thing that they're missing? Unless it was this goes to the benefit. Also, he talks about the benefit of the PLC model. But unless I had a PLC developed rubric, the rubrics that I was using were mine, I am not experienced enough to know what the rubric should be looking for. And then secondarily, I use the rubric, I give feedback, but I have 150 students and I'm teaching English language arts to both standard English speakers as well as non-English speakers. I am so slow to read. I assign a 3-page essay, say, for example, or a 2-page essay. Well, it takes me months to read through these and give them real feedback. I'm behind, and the feedback that they get is obsolete, and that doesn't work as a process for giving feedback on writing.
So do you see AI as an opportunity, potentially using like a Google Notebook and then uploading your rubric and then just feeding it in and asking it to do the first pass on things like grammar and voice, and did it have the components that you would expect? I think it's something that teachers are probably faced with right now and probably battling internally as well as with their peers about whether or not it's appropriate.
I feel like that's a good question for a teacher currently wrestling with that particular thing. I would say that because my reflection on myself is as I wasn't disciplined enough. I'm 22. Like, I'm not disciplined in anything. And so getting better at knowing how to use my time so that I can prioritize my work and make sure that the students I serve are getting timely feedback. Like, which essays actually require a grammar analysis and which ones don't? Which ones are about teaching a different idea behind? They have good ideas and good voice, but the syntax is in the way. Should they use AI to correct that?
Absolutely, they should. Absolutely. I am 100% behind a student being able to, as long as they turn in both pieces. Here it was before I turned it in. Here it is after I turned it in. You can see that I didn't just ask it to write me a story, but rather I wrote the story. I gave it a prompt. Here's the prompt I used, and then here's the product, and it comes in as a package. Wow. Think about for so many second language learners where the mechanics of English are the impediment that can now be clarified and not tax the teacher's time on having to correct all of that.
Right? That makes sense. But
I think
that, it raises the question. I'm asking it honestly,
No, I'm going to tie this to our conversation that we're about to have with Joe Feldman, which is because we talk about not just equitable grading practices, but also equity in the terms of who gets to take these classes, AP classes, things like that. And so from our conversations in past weeks with Aaron Johnson, it's saying, look, you might have a kid who has been underrepresented in these advanced courses and has the intelligence to take the course, and at the same time has not had the experience of writing these types of papers. Why not let them leverage AI to help them do that? That's not a violation of the student conduct code, particularly if they show you the prompt that they wrote and then turn in both papers. It's like doing an outline or a first draft. So how about this? Let's listen to our conversation with Joe Feldman, and then we're going to come back. Sound good?
Yes. Yeah, sounds great. Let's do that.
Let us also remind you, you're listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Also, if you enjoy this episode and if you've learned something today, please consider following the show or leaving us a 5-star review. This really does help the podcast more than I can say, and it allows us to reach more and more people. And that would just mean the world to us. So thank you so much. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? Kind of a silly question, because I know you are. Empath Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with Empath Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. Empath Speech, EMPAT speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools. Today on An Imperfect Leader, our guest is Joe Feldman, the founder and CEO of Crescendo Education Group. Joe, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
I'm really glad to meet you. In fact, my co-host and friend, Jamie Almanzan, told me that we had to meet. And when he sent that introductory email, I knew he was right, because he said, I'm consistently recommending your book as a starting point for folks as a way to open up a conversation about grading. It's one of the best resources out there. So maybe I could just start with a plug for your book, Grading for Equity, what it is, why it matters, and how it can transform schools and classrooms. So I wonder if my first question actually could be about your book. What compelled you to write it, and what can we learn from it? And by the way, I do love how in your book, I was able to read some of it, has these prompts or questions that lead into every chapter to sort of give you an idea of what to expect. So why don't we start there? Tell us about the book.
Yeah, well, I'm a former high school English and American history teacher. I was an assistant principal in a high school. I was principal of a couple of different high schools. I was a central office administrator in Union City, California, and then in New York City. And I was trying to figure out what was next. How could I contribute to the work of educators? And found that grading was something that had always nagged at me as a teacher, as an administrator at the site, as a central office person. And the more people I spoke with, the more I found I wasn't crazy, that grading was this thing that I just didn't really understand what it was for, what it was trying to do, how to do it well, because I hadn't had any training in how to do it in my graduate programs. So I started researching and found this long history of grading in this country, and then felt like, well, there's got to be better ways to do it, and started looking at the research and tried to really integrate other fields like culturally sustaining pedagogy and behavior and motivation and adolescent development and brain development, and try to arrive at a certain set of principles and ideas and practices that would make grading better, make it more accurate, more consistent, more fair, more intrinsically motivating to kids. And then tried to pilot these in a middle school in LA, actually, and found that these practices weren't just theoretically solid, that they were actually benefiting students, particularly those that we've historically underserved. And we're actually benefiting teachers in particular kind of ways, and kept doing that and was kind of growing this small little, shingle, put the shingle outside my home kind of business. And then felt like I had enough information and enough evidence that I should share it with folks. And Zaretta Hammond, who's the author of Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, who also lived in Oakland at the time, and I knew, said, "Oh, from what you've told me, you should write a book." So I started writing the book and tried to really bridge this divide I felt between research and practice, that there are teachers who just tell me what to do. And there's really theory that's really important for teachers to know. And I think we want to really blend those and try to make the book a really accessible one where it would help explain, here's the history of grading, here's the negative impact of our traditional grading, and here's ways to make it better. And so that's why I decided to write the book.
One of the things that as you were talking, I was thinking to myself how it really depends on who your teacher is and how grades are assigned, from everything from homework to extra credit to if you bring in additional tissue boxes in the winter, you get some additional benefit. And so the word fair really resonates. And I was thinking to myself about the opportunities when you think of equitable grading practices of giving children additional opportunities to show mastery. And I wonder if you would just talk about that a little bit, because sometimes even parents are a little confused about why we would give children first, second, third, fourth opportunities to demonstrate mastery.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, teachers like myself mostly get no education in how to grade. So most of us have really no choice but to replicate how we were graded, or how we've seen a mentor teacher grade who is replicating how they were graded or their mentor teacher. And so I really wanted to have ways, and I want teachers to have ways to access the research on it, because in many ways, our traditional grading is undermining our own practices and our own ways that we want kids to feel and experience school and learning. And one of the ways in which we can help align what we want kids to experience with what we believe about school is through multiple opportunities for students to demonstrate understanding. In the professional world, anytime you have to demonstrate competence, bar exam, medical boards, teacher credentialing, driver's license, you get multiple chances to demonstrate your success. And when you demonstrate it, there's no averaging of your performance over all the scores you've gotten. It's just, you did it. You get all the rewards and everything from passing or from, meeting the criteria. And I think that's something that we can do more in our schools, that when a student doesn't learn something the first time, then we have a chance to say, okay, what did you understand and what did you not understand? And what are the things that you need to now better understand so that you can demonstrate understanding later? And offering a redo or a retake or other kinds of ways of giving students another chance to understand. And what that does is builds in a motivation for students that I'm never out of the game. Like, I don't walk into a test and say, well, there's no way that I can pass this or do very well, so just forget it. It actually gives me a chance to give it a try. And if I don't do well, I can redeem myself.
Right. And learning is cumulative, right? So,
Right.
if we gave them one shot, it's a high stake, that's it.
Right.
And they don't do well, and we've moved on. What's the incentive, particularly for historically overlooked or historically oppressed groups that would say, so I guess that's it, huh? And then, yeah. So, wow.
And they come in with many students come in with weaker background knowledge and with fewer resources coming into the classroom. So it's reasonable that it might take them longer to understand everything. So if the train's moving, and you take the quiz, you didn't do it, sorry, we're moving on to the next unit. Like, you're not giving that kid the chance to compensate and to catch up. And this is one way in which you're able to do that.
I saw something that you put out about inviting people to the second annual Equitable Grading Study Tour. What is that?
So we found that one of the things that makes improving grading hard is leaders who are kind of isolated in their work, and around this work in particular can feel very lonely and like I'm, trying to do this thing and I'm the trailblazer and it's a heavy boulder up a steep hill and it's just really hard. So we felt like finding ways for leaders to connect with each other was really important, and to see how districts have made their way to more equitable grading. And so this study tour, we piloted it last year, and we're now doing it again and really inviting large groups to come, where we are going to meet in the Bay Area. San Leandro Unified is going to be our kind of case study. We're going to meet there. And on day one, we're going to hear from all the constituents, the teachers, the school leaders, the central office folks, students, parents, board member even, about what has the journey been like to make grading better. And it's been, I think, like 8 years for them. And we're bringing in teams, inviting teams, leadership teams from districts across the country to attend day one. And then day two is we're going to help build networks and collaborative conversations among the different attendees and give them some supported planning time so they can think about what's their next step, what's their long-term kind of path that they can set out for themselves, so they can see how to really move their whole system. Because, as important as the book is for an individual teacher to read, what we really want is coherence across teachers within a system and the whole system to move. So it's not such a fragmented way of students experiencing grading. And we think that this study tour will help folks do that. So it's March 4th and 5th. And if people are interested, they can go check out the website and get information.
You tell us your website?
Yes, it's crescendoedgroup.org.
We'll make sure that's in the show notes too. That's great.
Yeah, Crescendo is CRESC for my musician people in the house.
Fantastic. I'll get louder and louder. And I will decrescendo. Okay, how about that? All right. If you're just joining us, our guest today is Joe Feldman, founder and CEO of Crescendo Education Group. Joe, I actually want to talk a little bit about this idea of fragmentation. In the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension called collective aspiration, and it's the heart of an organization's work. And the idea of a compelling purpose is part of collective aspiration. And I feel like your work around equitable grading practice goes right to this. And if it's okay, I'll monologue for a moment. I'm just going to give you an example. When I was a superintendent in the Midwest, I was approached by a high school who had aggressively engaged in equitable grading practices work. They wanted to separate the documentation of learning from work habits. They wanted to give children multiple ways to show understanding instead of high stakes exams worth like 80% of a grade. They wanted to rethink policies around homework and extra credit. And they were really leaders in this work. They were traveling regularly up to Iowa to see a school up there that was doing this work. And they wanted to do this work throughout the district. And meanwhile, I had 4 high schools. I had 7 middle schools. I had 22 elementary schools, and I had a 30% mobility rate. So 1 in every 3 kids moving from one school to another during the year. And so grading practice was like one thing. Issues of scope and sequence, like the what and when we're teaching standards, that was another thing. And so none of that had been resolved at the district level. So talk about fragmentation, or even at the school level in some cases. I would say, boy, I would really like chemistry teachers between these 2 high schools to be teaching at the same topics so that kids aren't missing entire units of study. And principal would reply, I'd like that in my own building too. Like, we can't even agree on that. So this high school, wanted a system-wide rethinking of grading practices, and they had a little appetite for waiting. So from a systems thinking perspective, I found myself in this complex situation where there was no good answer. So thanks for enduring this monologue. I have a question. So we couldn't have been an anomaly. And so I'm actually kind of thinking that this convening that you're doing is to really address that. But, lots of districts have these champions for this new way of thinking about teaching and learning and assessment. And so with this idea of compelling purpose, the notion of identifying or answering the question of, why schools exist, what advice do you have for schools or district leaders who are thinking about shifting their practice away from traditional models of giving grades?
Yeah, it's so context specific on one hand, because as you mentioned, there's a whole list of priorities that you have, and you have to really figure out what is the, and learning capacity of the adults. How much can their brains handle to take on and integrate and learn and bring into their practice? Because you want to make sure that anything you're giving your adults to learn about actually translate into changes for students. So they've got to have enough cognitive capacity to be able to do that hard work. And what are the other factors that are going on? Are there bond initiatives that are coming up? Is there a curriculum adoption that's happening? All of these things, and the relationships that you have, like what's your political capital? What's your social capital as a leader? So on one hand, I can't answer the question because it is so complex around all those different dynamics. And I think there are some general things that we've learned about this, which is that what's really important when it comes to grading is because it is so tightly a part of teachers' identity in many cases, right? Without any training, teachers are adapting and building this on their own. And it is very much something that they hold very tightly to. It implicates aspect of their authority, of their power, of their choice and personality, like all these really important parts of teacher practice and teacher identity. And I don't say that to to throw shade at teachers like that. I think there are so many pressures on teachers and so many things taken away from us as teachers that the grading is one of the last islands of autonomy and professionalism that we have left. And so it's really important that we hold on to that. And because of that, I think it's important that we start with building, a pilot group or some small kind of groups that like a PLC that can start to explore this and implement it and really build some evidence. I think that is what kind of trips leaders up a lot of times when they're trying to do system change around grading, is that it becomes top down too quickly. And there's no confidence that teachers have that if these practices that you talk about are implemented in my classroom, it'll benefit me or my students. That there's just too many things that are different about this place, and a theoretical application of an idea won't work here. And so you need to start getting experiences and evidence in classrooms that are in that same context so that the teachers can say, well, I used to think that it wouldn't work to give retakes. I thought every kid would just then take the initial test as a practice and they wouldn't take it seriously. And then I started doing it, and this is what I found, and this is what I learned. And then I tried this and it got even better. And then this student told me this. And that is what helps build momentum among the teacher core so that you can then start to build structures that allow teachers to move in this direction. And then you can start to do this policy practice dance to move the system in that way. And the last thing I'll say is that you want to house grading within other things that teachers are thinking about. So we've been, in the case you gave, we've been really thinking about how to get a kid in one chemistry class to have a similar kind of curriculum to another class. But, we know you're using the same textbook, but I know things are so different here. But we think like this work around grading will actually help us surface like what are the differences. And I just think
that's interesting. Yeah, because then at that point, when you mentioned a professional learning community, the idea that, okay, so we're each going to give an assessment. If we were to give the assessment on mitosis at the same time, it also would reveal to us maybe some strengths and opportunities when it comes to our own teaching of the content. And then we ourselves are also building a better opportunity to partner and to become better teachers. And it doesn't have to be such an isolated island type of experience. So that's interesting. I really like this idea also of approaching it from an action research type of way for groups of teachers to be able to try it out, be able to have an opportunity to then share out. I think Doug Reeves, who was a guest on the show about a year ago, talked about almost creating your own science fair for your educators to go around and see what they've learned from each other. That often can be a real catalyst for change within a school and then potentially for the school district. So that's really great.
And that action research, we really use that when we partner. My organization partners with schools and districts around this work. And one of the key ways we do it is to support groups of teachers with action research because it is so powerful a learning process. And what we find is that teachers really like the way the ability to choose what practice they're going to try it out with students, collect some data, not hardcore, research data, but like giving them some feedback and then sharing with colleagues and learning from each other and building this community of practice around grading.
It's also fair to say, this is a significant shift in any school or school district. And so giving yourself permission that it will take time. And I think that's often everyone is so impatient, or they see the urgency of shifting the system, and it becomes a false start or just a frustration. And so they abandon it because they don't recognize that it takes a lot of time.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the pitfalls that we see leaders fall into, is that especially when they understand, and most, I think, site administrators and certainly district administrators understand the variability of grading that's happening in their district or in their school, right? And there's this real, genuine, and important impulse to fix it. Like, I can fix it if I make it where every teacher has to give retakes, or every teacher has to give minimum 50%, or whatever, based on the research that makes grading better. But they shouldn't do that because
right.
It just
well, some of us feel as if and it's true. I mean, if the sort of, for the superintendent's perspective, the national average of a lifespan of a superintendent in a district is about 3 years. And if you're a leader of color, it's about 2 years. And so, so they see look, like a minimum 50%, the argument against the zero, like that seems like an easy one, technical change, I'm going to do it. However, it often backfires. Yeah.
That's right.
Hey, how does the term an imperfect leader resonate for you?
Almost redundant. I mean, there is no leadership without being imperfect. I mean, I in prepping for this podcast, I thought a bit about my time as a school leader and as a district leader. And you generally don't get everything right. And sometimes you get things really wrong. And I think it's part of what I try to do, at least, is to help make explicit that imperfection, and that I'm just trying this. I think this will work. What do you think? Like, we're giving this a shot. I believe in the people I work with. We're going to give it a go, and we're going to be really humble and reflective and seek input and feedback. And we think we're moving in the right direction, and I believe this is the right direction, but we may not get it right the first time. I mean, I think it models a really great kind of language and approach to being a learner. I mean, because really the superintendent should be the lead learner and have that sort of orientation and situate themselves as that in order to model that all the way down. And learners make mistakes, and that's why we have retakes.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an imperfect leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader, called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And our guest today is Joe Feldman, the founder and CEO of Crescendo Education Group. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made, and then we discuss it. So, Joe, what happened?
So I couldn't think of a specific example, but I think there's this sort of strain of.
So you're going to cheat a little bit, huh?
I'm gonna bend the rules. I'm going to interpret the rules that will be the most valuable.
Very good.
Yeah. So it's a trend, I think, that I experienced, and I still am learning how to do this better. But I think the early mistakes that I would make would be around the people that I would hire. I think early my tendency was to hire people that are like me, because I like me and I feel like I've done some good things to get into this position of leadership being like me. So I should hire other people that are like me because they'll do well too. And that can sort of manifest itself in all kinds of ways, whether, race or language or culture or appearance or gender, all kinds of ways. And, I think, I was aware of that. Like, you actually don't want to have, just a bunch of white guys that come from this part of the country that do this, act in these kind of ways. But it was very hard sort of an implementation for me to get around that. And I think over time, I've gotten better at recognizing that there are people who can be and will be amazing and very different from me. And in fact, like that I will learn and become better by being around people who are very different from me. And again, this plays out in all kinds of, differences. I think the better I'm getting at this, the better I'm getting. It's not just differences around race or culture or gender or whatever, but it's like differences in like ways of thinking. Like, how does my brain operate? How do I relate to people? Like differences like that level, I think is what I've tried to get better at. And that's hard to get to in an interview, but I think that, that's one aspect of that. I think the other that's related to that is that when people are different, I have to trust them just as much as the people who are similar. And that's hard. That's the next step, right? So I've hired them and I've gotten them to join, but now I got to trust them. And that I think is something that I've tried to get better and better at over time.
So when you first started talking, I was thinking of succession planning because so many of us want to make sure that the work that we've begun will continue in some way. And obviously the people who follow us, the leaders that follow us, may do it differently because they will bring their own approach to it. However, we hope that they fundamentally believe in the work that we started together. And so I think sometimes our impulse is to try to hire people who are like us and think like us, or at least, we enjoy being with since we spend so much time at work. And to your point, I think we often overlook the opportunity to make something even better when we hire someone who is different from us or thinks differently or approaches things differently than we do. So I was trying to think of how do I ask Joe about but I wonder in terms of what I've just asked you, is that something that you sort of experience? It's I guess I'm trying to get at why is it that we typically, our default is, I'm going to choose the person who seems to have had similar experiences and is like us. And yet your work is all around equitable, whatever, right. Equitable grading practices, equity in leadership, equity in system design. And so I'm really curious how you confronted that, to yourself. You almost had to have a reckoning with yourself.
Oh, but just to be clear, this is way back, my first
Sure.
job.
I'm not saying it happened yesterday, and I appreciate that. However, if that is what came to mind, it's something that you think about, and it's something that you want to then share with others on how they can become better leaders.
Yeah. It was really, I think feedback was very helpful. I would really ask the people who I hired about that, or there would be a candidate who I would have some concern about, and people would say, give it a try. And then it would be oh, this person is actually great at their work. And I wouldn't have expected that based on my limited experiences as a leader at the time. There was a woman who was an assistant principal for me who, when I was leaving and sort of as a succession to her, and I asked for just general feedback on me as a supervisor. And one of the things she said was, trust people even more, let people are different than you and they will be successful also, give them even more trust than you're giving. And I thought I was giving them a lot. And they said, we love what you're giving us and give us more. And this is back in my my early 30s, I think. And I'm a bit older now.
Joe is 95 years old. People can't see him, but he sounds great. You're looking great.
But now, in my organization now, we talk really frankly about each other's styles and what we need and what makes us different and be better at supporting each other around that. And I continue to be, right. That person is great at this, not so good at this, but they're not so good at, that's okay because they're really good at this other thing. And we can find ways to complement each other around the things they're not good at because I'm actually not so good at this other thing that they're good at.
Right. So, well, that's interesting.
That out.
So typically my third question is, so what did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed? And it really seems like this influenced the way that you relate to people and build relationships. I'm curious if you'd explore that a little.
Yeah. I think trusting people more means you control them less and you become mutually dependent on them, which requires you to be vulnerable, which builds relationships. I mean, it's really kind of a clean, linear path, and I don't think it is so clean, but it feels like that. Like when I have to say, I'm not good at this thing, and I need help with this thing, and other people do the same thing, and we do trust each other to help with the things that we're good at, I feel like that deepens the relationship that we have with each other.
You know, for those who are listening, I also want you to know that there will be times where you trust and it blows up. And that is something that when you think about cycles of inquiry or in your own mind, how do you rebound from that? Because you want to continue to be open and trusting. And sometimes you find yourself, at least I can speak for myself, which I think is important. You have to wrestle with the jadedness that starts to come in of like, you know what, I'll just do it because I've been, and that is a really destructive way of leading because all of a sudden you're trying to carry all the water or, you know, and you have incredible people who are willing to do it. And just like we said earlier, or you said in terms of leadership, I mean, imperfectness or being imperfect is just the way that we are. And so how can you hold people to a higher standard than you are holding yourself in terms of admitting that we make mistakes and we hope to learn from them?
Yeah, it's really hard. And when you say, you know, people who, when it doesn't work out, it's not usually, at least I haven't had the experience of, you know, trust being harmed by someone being deceitful or going against me. And I think that is a whole.
That's a really good distinction, right? Someone, they failed. It wasn't as if the intent wasn't genuine and good. They weren't successful. And that's different from, I absconded with the district's money. You shouldn't have trusted me.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. In the end, what was something that was good that came out of the situation?
Well, because it's not a single situation, it's hard. It's a little harder for me to answer, but I think it's just greater humility, understanding of self, people feeling empowered was really good and feeling trusted. I mean, when people feel trusted, they want to, in most cases, they don't want to let you down. And so they really invest themselves more and they I think, do better and everybody's happier. But, you know, not always, as you said, but I think that's what I've found is a gain from that.
What advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
I think it's easiest for me to do that really in my lane, which is around grading reform, but I think it can be applied in other ways. And I think that you are a lead learner and you're the lead teacher. And I think you have to think about how you're going to create the conditions for other people to grow, because that's what teachers do. What are the optimal conditions I can create that help my students learn more? How am I going to create the optimal conditions to help the people around me learn and improve in what they do and be successful in what they do? So with grading, that means giving people education, giving people supports, building the space for them to make mistakes and letting them know that mistakes are going to be okay. And
meaning it.
And meaning it, yeah. And thinking about all the constituencies that matter when you're asking teachers to take risks. Right? How are you going to communicate? How are you going to build in your education plan, your teaching plan, bringing parents and caregivers along, helping the board understand, or helping, if you're at the site level, your central office folks understand what's happening. So that teacher is protected and being able to take those risks.
Yeah. You know, I would say also when we brought in higher ed to better understand what we were trying to do, because we were a university town, 60% of our kids were going to the local colleges or universities within that area. And we at that time didn't have weighted grades or things like that. How do we make sure that everybody understands what we're trying to achieve? Because ultimately, and I'll use this as our conclusion to say, our guest today was Joe Feldman, the founder and CEO of Crescendo Education Group. And Joe, I would say that what we were trying to do is really remind our community inside and outside the system that it was about learning. That's what we exist for in terms of learning, so that children have the very best opportunity to go and do the things that they aspire to do. And so I want to thank you so much for giving me time today, talking about equitable grading practices, talking about your convening that's coming up, talking about the fact that there's such value in engaging in action research, whether you're at the teacher level, principal level, and superintendent level. You want to make genuine change, give it a try. I love that as a phrase. And then also recognize that change takes time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the conversation.
Okay, so we are back. And by the way, What do you think about the new music as the transition?
It's good.
You only have one answer. The answer is, oh, it's good. Because unless you're going to start adding the music. So it's good.
I'm not.
It's good.
So it's great. It's great.
Yeah,
I love it.
Oh,
it's
great now.
The section you've chosen. The section you've chosen is spectacular.
I am. You're trying to show like there's an actual change between the conversation we've just had and then the conversation we're now having. So I do appreciate that you made the suggestion. We should probably have some sort of transition so that people know that there's a difference. All right.
Exactly.
So we are back.
Yes.
Your thoughts. What are some thoughts?
Your thoughts. Can I ask? I have a question.
Yes.
And it's a general question. And I have a few different ideas that came up during listening to Joe. And the first question is, what causes us, educators, to be fearful of research?
That's interesting. Huh.
Why is there such a gap between ed research and practice?
I think sometimes, well, first of all, access to it. Oh. Not everybody's reading the research that comes out.
But when presented, there's still well, that won't work here.
Yes, that's so true, isn't it? Like,
we're so unique. We're the most unique. Give us examples of your research in a district that's exactly like ours.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You've just made me want to curse. I just want to swear. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's interesting that worked there, but it won't work here. Or they don't have the same kind of kids that we have. Like what? Kids? Like living and breathing children?
Correct.
So I don't know what the resistance is other than a resistance to change. And so a resistance to change can manifest in a questioning the research, questioning the methods, wondering why they need to change. That to me has been the biggest thing. And if I could add something that Joe said that I thought was really helpful was his warning, or if it's a warning as much as just reminding leaders that when it's top down, like if it becomes top down, he said, if it becomes top down too quickly and there's no confidence that the teachers have, these practices that like you talk about, if they're implemented in the classroom, that it will benefit me or my students. So I think it is that. It's like we cite the research and then say, so let's do it before we capture their hearts around why and then how it might look. And then for them to say, well, let's give it a try.
I said something similar. Basically, I said that comment he made about grading being one of the last bastions of autonomy for teachers. I think there's something there related to the sense of autonomy that the profession often pulls from teachers. And I don't want to also indicate that that's for the wrong reasons. Like there are plenty of examples of autonomy being pulled away because I'll use myself as an example. As I've said earlier at the opening, I was a young teacher. You probably should mandate what rubric to use. The fact that there was no mandate for the rubric to use indicates the power. If I am a very skilled teacher, that's probably fine. But as a beginning teacher, it's not fine. I don't know enough.
So as a superintendent, I was the superintendent of a district where 50% of our teachers were in their first 5 years. Yeah. So I had deep respect for the veteran teachers, and the reality for us wasn't hard to find teachers. It was hard to keep them because we were a university town and a college town. And so after about 4 or 5 years, they often would go home. They'd go closer to where their families were. They were going to start families that they wanted to be closer to their families. And so respect that. However, for us, it was a perpetual revolving door of new teachers. And so there was this struggle around, we're going to use this rubric. And then others would say, yeah, but I've been doing this for 20 years and I know my content. Absolutely, you do. Yeah. However, 3/4 of your team have not been doing it for more than a year. And so we're going to do this all together, particularly since we're 30% mobility rate. 1 in every 3 kids is moving from one building to the next. We've got to have some alignment and consistency. So I did enjoy something that Joe also said, because it's something I think we talk about quite a bit, about being a lead learner. In fact, my book that's coming out hopefully some point this year is about serving as a lead learner. So every time he said lead learner, my heart just went, oh, isn't that nice?
Good.
But he says, I think you have to be that lead learner. You have to be that lead teacher. And I think you have to think about how you're going to create the conditions for other people to grow. So I'd say one more time to your question about why don't they trust research, it's we haven't given them time to grow. We just cite it as evidence and want to move on.
Well, I think that's some of the pressure in our system is that it's about moving on. It is about moving on. It's about doing a thing and then going to the next thing, which goes to the other point that I thought was so powerful was we don't offer multiple chances to show competency. And his examples of like a driver's license, yeah, you get it and then you just have it.
And however, if you failed, you can take it again. And
correct.
They don't cumulatively say like, he ran 4 stoplights, knocked over a mailbox. So we're going to average it with this well done, but he still failed. No.
Yeah, exactly.
Multiple opportunities. Yeah,
exactly. And that you're just showing that you could do it. The more powerful ones were the bar or the medical boards. I'm like, right. You passed the bar, you passed the bar. If you didn't pass the bar first, you go and take it again. You
that's
pass
exactly
the bar, you're
right.
through.
And you know what they call you? Lawyer.
A lawyer.
You know what they call you for medical school? Your board? Doctor.
Yeah.
They didn't say, you're doctor, you're kind
Dr. C+. Dr. C-. Let me tell you what was my absolute favorite part of the entire episode. This is going to show my absurdity was when you made the crescendo joke.
Crescendo, decrescendo, boom.
I was like, oh my God.
I edited out a part where I say, really flexing my musician muscles here. I was like, that's stupid. Let me edit that out.
Oh my God. It is all so stupid. It's so good. It's such a good dad joke. He was like, crescendo for your music buff. He's like, so maybe I should keep talking louder.
Maybe I'll just decrescendo now. All right.
And the fact that there was zero answer from Joe made me.
Yeah. I think he was like, all right, how do I get out of this conversation?
He's like, I've heard that before.
Yeah, well.
Oh, that was great. Back to Joe. One other. So I love that idea of demonstrating competency. And it just, what it made me think of was video games. And how every video game is basically when you fail, when you die in the video game, you start over and you just go again and you keep going. And when you finish the video game, they don't go, well, you didn't finish it. But rather, no, it doesn't really matter. The purpose is that you're learning the patterns, you're learning the game, and you take what you've learned and you keep moving forward. You keep going forward.
Whoa. Yeah.
Want
to try again?
Why? Yeah, exactly. Want to play again? Yeah.
Wouldn't that be cool if we as educators just said, here's your, returning the tests. Want to try again?
Yeah.
Do you want to play again?
What makes us not?
Because we are bizarre in our thought that I taught it. Now they take the test and this is what they earned, as if it's like some sort of character assessment about the person who took the test, as opposed to, you heard me say to Joe, I think, what are schools for? They're for learning. They are for learning, not for test taking, not for whatever the grade is that you got on the assessment. Do I think at some point you can't keep taking the test? Maybe. Do you think that, and purely for the teacher's time, oh my God, you said earlier, I had 150 kids, I had to keep reading their papers. And if this kid just keeps turning it in. So you say, look, if you got below an 85, you can retake it. If you got an 85 or above, why are you retaking it? Because you learned it. You mastered the content. 85, you learned it. That to me. So there has to be some sort of conversation around that. And, he's having convening this summit, and I'm really excited about it, the second summit, because I really think that there's opportunity to build this coalition of believers of trying to change the way that we think about grades.
Even the way your example there, where you're like, you got an 85. Why are we bothering with 85? You got the concept.
Yeah. Here's the thing. In an equitable grading practice, they even remove the percentage. They just say 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
4, you've mastered it and above. 3, you mastered it. 2, there are gaps. 1, you have not demonstrated almost any knowledge of the concepts. The problem is, for parents, that's tricky. They want their kids to have 4s. And for colleges, you have to figure out how to convert that 1 to 4 into some type of grade, because admissions wants to know what was your GPA. They're not asking, did the child learn? So that's the challenge. The system doesn't have coherent kindergarten through graduate school. So there has to be some sort of conversion, or, creating a grade. And so that's why.
Makes me want to say like, oh, okay, well then everybody who's got the concept, they all have 4.0s. Okay, I'll make one more reflection. So you had made a comment about the after action review, and I thought it was really an interesting one and not well, but the concept was good. Meaning, his like, I'm going to bend the rules. I don't mind the bending of the rules. What I mind is the consistent emphasis on it being a long time ago that this happened.
That's interesting. So maybe moving forward, I really have to stress to the guest, look, I appreciate if you want to talk about the last district you were in because you're in a new district and you're not ready to talk about current events. However, 20 something years ago is interesting, maybe. However, it's not relevant to today's practicing educators.
You made a great intervention there when he said, it was a long time ago. This was a long time ago. And you said, sure, but the fact that you're bringing it up makes me wonder. And I was like, oh, that's so good. Good job, Peter. Basically yeah, wait, hold on. We're not letting go yet.
That's right.
Because
that has been on your mind, that you've been thinking about this for some point.
Exactly. That's what you said.
Yeah.
The after action review here about hiring people who are like you and then getting stuck there and then like realizing, actually, I need the opposite. I 100% agree. All of my colleagues think differently. In fact, I've learned something about being a leader of an organization. We had a colleague. Our colleague was a connector, amazing at making the team feel like a team. And when that colleague left, it didn't occur to me that that was the strength. I didn't see it. And then that colleague is gone. And the team isn't a team. Now, all group dynamics show that anytime a team changes, someone new comes or someone leaves, the dynamic shifts. But the particular skill set of this colleague, different from all of us, was vital. The best example that I can give of it is on my team, we all have different senses of humor. And I never really noticed that until this connector left. Because the connector made all of us feel funny.
That's really powerful. I think a really powerful statement also for those who are listening to think about, whatever it is that you're doing, is to think about who are the people involved in these changes. So whether it's equitable grading practice through Joe Feldman, whether it's just the cultural field you're trying to curate and hold on to, how important it is to take the time to think about the people who are in that room, who are in this organization with you, and to do that work together. I don't know if that's really summing it up as much as I'd hoped, but I do think that system-wide change is really difficult to implement, and it's even more difficult when you are not considering the beliefs, principles, values, personalities of the people you're working with to create that change.
I preach all the time to folks in the districts that we work in that the benefit of a staff meeting is that everyone in the room is different. That's why you do it. You do a staff meeting to have multiple brains, different brains, talk to each other. There is no point to have PE talk to PE in a secondary school. Have PE talk to math, talk to science, talk to music, etc., because all of their brains think about problems differently. And you want to capitalize on that. That's where the power comes from. If you're using your staff meeting time to tell them stuff, you don't get to capitalize on the multiple different kinds of people that are in the room. You want to lean into that. It's really, I'm not saying this is easy. I'm saying it as if it's like, oh, just put them together. No, because they won't easily talk to each other either. You have to practice. This is the slow part that Joe mentioned. It takes time. It takes structure. It takes discipline. And it takes preferably someone who's a good connector.
What a great ending.
Thanks.
I look forward to seeing you next week.
See you next week.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.
Bye.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast.